The handcuffs clicked shut around Darius King's wrists as a dozen passengers recorded every second on their phones, a black man in a $15,000 suit being dragged off a first-class flight he supposedly didn't belong on. What the flight attendants, the security officers, and everyone watching didn't know was that 5 minutes ago, Darius made one phone call that just put the entire airport on lockdown. Because the man they're arresting, he doesn't just own his seat, he owns every single person trying to throw him off this plane. You're making a mistake you won't be able to undo. The words hung in the air of the first-class cabin, calm and measured, even as Officer Marcus Steele's grip tightened on Darius King's shoulder. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the luxury space, sharp against the soft hum of preparation for takeoff. Around them, passengers had frozen mid-motion, champagne flutes suspended halfway to lips, conversations dying mid-sentence, all eyes fixed on the unfolding confrontation. Olivia Bennett's voice had risen moments before, loud enough for everyone to hear, her tone shrill with a strange mixture of authority and vindication. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one last time, gather your things and move to economy, or these officers will remove you from this aircraft." Her words carried a sharp edge, dripping with condescension and barely concealed satisfaction. She stood with her arms crossed, her pristine uniform somehow making her prejudice look even more official, more justified in her own mind. Darius, the man in the impeccably tailored navy blazer and crimson tie, looked up at her with an expression of profound calm. His dark eyes held something that Olivia mistook for defeat but was actually patience, the kind of patience that comes from having seen this scenario play out before, from knowing exactly how it would end. "I've already told you," he said simply, his voice even, almost soothing, but holding an undeniable strength that made several nearby passengers lean forward unconsciously. "I'm exactly where I belong." Beside Olivia, her colleague Chloe Simmons shifted uncomfortably, her face flushed with uncertainty. She'd gone along with Olivia's suspicions, made the call to security, but now, watching this composed man about to be dragged off the plane, doubt was creeping in like cold water. Something about this felt terribly, irrevocably wrong. Officer Natalie Brooks stood behind her partner Steele, her hand resting on her radio, her trained eyes scanning Darius for signs of aggression or resistance. She found none. The man sat with the bearing of someone accustomed to boardrooms, not confrontations. His watch alone, she'd noticed it immediately, was worth more than she made in 6 months. But Olivia had been insistent on the phone, disruptive passenger, suspicious behavior, making other travelers uncomfortable, possible security threat. He was being humiliated in front of everyone, recorded on a dozen phones held by shocked passengers, their cameras capturing every moment of what they assumed was just another entitled passenger being removed from a flight. The red recording lights dotted the cabin like accusatory eyes. But no one expected what would happen next, when the man they thought was powerless, the man they assumed didn't belong in first class, would make a single phone call that would bring the entire airport to its knees and change everything. Not just for Olivia and Chloe, whose careers would be over within the hour. Not just for Officers Steele and Brooks, who would spend the rest of their lives grateful they'd listened to one quiet warning. But for every person who had ever been judged by their appearance, ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in a space they'd paid for, ever been treated as suspicious simply for existing in luxury while black. As we delve into this story, if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their appearance, click the subscribe button now and tell us where you're watching from. Because what you're about to witness is a masterclass in how prejudice doesn't just hurt its victims, it destroys everyone it touches. The aircraft gleamed under the morning sun, its sleek design promising a luxurious journey for its elite passengers. The plane sat on the tarmac like a white bird of privilege, its windows reflecting the clear sky, its engines humming with barely restrained power. This was Sky Alliance Regional's premier route, the kind of flight where champagne flowed freely, where every passenger was treated like royalty, where the ticket price alone ensured a certain caliber of traveler. Or so Olivia Bennett believed. Inside the cabin was nothing short of opulence. Plush cream leather seats with gold accent stitching stretched in generous rows, each position offering more space than most people had in their living rooms. Soft ambient lighting created an atmosphere of exclusive comfort, the kind that whispered, "You've made it," to everyone who settled into these seats. Gold fixtures traced the overhead compartments like veins of wealth. The air itself seemed different here, climate-controlled to perfection, scented subtly with something expensive and vaguely floral, carrying the quiet murmur of privilege and power. Passengers moved with the ease of those accustomed to luxury, their expensive luggage rolling smoothly behind them on wheels that didn't squeak, didn't catch, didn't betray any hint of the ordinary world they'd left at the gate. Designer carry-ons were stowed with care by white-gloved attendants. Some passengers scrolled through tablets displaying stock portfolios and international news. Others sipped champagne offered on silver trays, the crystal glasses catching the light with each measured sip. Quiet conversations about mergers and European vacations floated through the cabin like background music. Among them was Darius King, a calm and composed man in his early 40s, dressed in a tailored navy blazer that fit him like it had been painted on. The fabric was Italian, the cut was precise, and the subtle sheen spoke of quality that didn't need to announce itself. His crimson tie provided a bold accent, a pop of confidence against the understated elegance of his ensemble, the kind of deliberate choice made by men who understood that power doesn't shout. Darius exuded quiet sophistication, the kind that came from years of moving through spaces where presence mattered more than performance. He moved with measured, confident steps, his Italian leather shoes silent against the cabin floor, his gaze sweeping the space with the practiced assessment of someone who saw details others missed. The cleanliness of the carpet, the precision of the service, the subtle hierarchies already forming among passengers, all of it registered in his mind like data points in an equation he'd been solving his entire career. His destination wasn't just another business trip. This was a covert inspection of his newest acquisition, though no one on board yet knew who he was. The paperwork had closed at midnight, a multi-billion-dollar deal that made him the owner of 47 aircraft and every person currently employed to operate them. But Darius King hadn't built an empire by trusting reports and presentations. He wanted to see the truth that only anonymity could reveal. He wanted to experience what his passengers experienced when they thought no one important was watching. He preferred it that way. For now. Olivia Bennett, the lead flight attendant in her mid-30s, stood near the galley like a sentinel of standards, her crisp uniform perfectly pressed, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her sharp features even sharper. She greeted passengers one by one with practiced precision, her smile warm for some, noticeably cooler for others. She prided herself on maintaining order on her flights, though her idea of order often depended on how people looked, how they carried themselves, whether they fit her mental image of who belonged in first class and who didn't. Olivia's welcoming tone shifted subtly as Darius passed, a change so small that most passengers wouldn't notice, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. "Welcome aboard," she said curtly, the warmth noticeably absent, her eyes already moving past him to the next passenger as if he were merely an obstacle to be processed rather than a guest to be served. Behind Darius, an elderly couple settled into their seats, the Harrisons, seasoned travelers in their 70s who radiated the ease of those who'd been flying first class for longer than some crew members had been alive. Mrs. Harrison clutched a designer handbag, her pearls catching the cabin light like drops of captured moonlight. Mr. Harrison adjusted his reading glasses with the confidence of a man who'd never once been questioned about whether he belonged in any space he chose to occupy, a folded copy of the Financial Times tucked under his arm like a badge of legitimacy. Olivia's smile brightened instantly for them, transforming her face into something genuinely warm. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. So wonderful to have you flying with us again. Can I get you anything before we depart? Perhaps some champagne? I know you prefer the Dom Perignon, and we have your favorite vintage on board today." Mrs. Harrison beamed. "You remember, dear. How thoughtful. Of course. Your valued guests. Darius glanced over his shoulder, noting the stark contrast in Olivia's tone, the way her voice carried genuine warmth for the elderly white couple, the way her body language opened toward them while it had remained closed, almost defensive, when addressing him. His expression remained calm, though his eyes reflected a quiet awareness of the unspoken dynamics at play, the invisible lines being drawn based on nothing more than appearance and assumption. As other passengers settled into their seats, Olivia moved through the cabin with Chloe Simmons, her younger colleague, ensuring everything was perfect. She checked on the Harrison couple again, offering another bright smile, adjusting Mrs. Harrison's pillow without being asked. "Are you comfortable? The blankets are cashmere if you need extra warmth. And Mr. Harrison, I'll bring your usual scotch once we're at altitude." When Olivia passed Darius's row, her demeanor shifted once more, a subtle but unmistakable change in energy. She glanced at his carry-on bag resting neatly in the overhead compartment, her eyes lingering on the Hermès label with something that looked like suspicion rather than recognition of quality. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't offer the same courtesy or warmth she'd shown others, simply walking by without acknowledgement, as if he were invisible, as if his presence was somehow an aberration in her carefully maintained world of appropriate passengers. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's attitude shifted based on appearances? Where you could feel yourself being judged, categorized, dismissed before you'd even spoken? Share your experience in the comments below and click the subscribe button, because this story is about to reveal what happens when prejudice picks the wrong target. Olivia Bennett, in her mid-30s, carried herself with the precision of someone who thrived on control. Her pristine uniform and perfectly styled hair matched her sharp demeanor, creating an image of professionalism that masked something uglier beneath. To Olivia, appearances mattered more than anything else, and her judgments were swift and unapologetic. She'd been flying for 12 years, she'd tell anyone who asked, and she developed an instinct for who really belonged in first class and who was just pretending. Olivia's eyes narrowed as she watched Darius settle into his window seat, adjusting his watch, a timepiece that, had she looked closer or known anything about high-end accessories, she would have recognized as a limited edition piece that cost more than her annual salary. But Olivia wasn't looking for evidence that contradicted her assumptions. She was looking for confirmation of what she'd already decided. Something about Darius didn't sit right with her. Not his clothes, which were clearly expensive. Not his demeanor, which was impeccably polite and composed. It was something else entirely, something she couldn't name but felt absolutely justified in acting upon. Something that had nothing to do with facts and everything to do with the color of his skin and her own unexamined biases. And that feeling, that unfounded suspicion, that prejudice masquerading as professional judgment, would lead her to make the worst mistake of her career. A mistake that would be witnessed by millions. A mistake that would cost her everything. But more importantly, a mistake that would finally force a long overdue conversation about who belongs in luxury spaces, and who gets to decide. Darius King had built his empire on a simple principle: you can't fix what you don't see. And today, he intended to see everything. The acquisition had closed at midnight, a multi-billion-dollar deal that added 3 regional carriers and 47 aircraft to his aviation conglomerate. The paperwork sat in a secure server, the press release scheduled for noon, but Darius wanted something the lawyers and accountants couldn't provide. He wanted the truth that only anonymity could reveal. So he'd booked a first-class seat under his own name, no aliases, no advance notice to staff, no corporate entourage trailing behind him. Just Darius King, passenger, experiencing the service his money had just purchased. The morning air was crisp as he approached the gate, his Italian leather briefcase in one hand, a garment bag slung over his shoulder. His tailored navy blazer fit like it had been painted on, the fabric catching the light with each measured step. The red tie was deliberate, a pop of confidence against the understated elegance of his ensemble. His watch, a limited edition piece that cost more than most cars, caught the fluorescent airport lights as he presented his boarding pass. The gate agent's smile was professional, automatic. "Welcome aboard, Mr. King. First class, seat 3A. Enjoy your flight. No recognition. Perfect." Darius walked down the jet bridge, his mind already cataloging details. The cleanliness of the carpet. The temperature of the corridor. The efficiency of the boarding process. These were the invisible threads that wove together customer experience, and he'd spent 20 years learning to see them all. As he stepped into the cabin, the opulence hit him immediately, exactly as the previous owner had promised. Cream leather gleamed under soft lighting. Gold accents traced the overhead compartments. The scent of leather and subtle cologne hung in the air, the olfactory signature of luxury. But luxury, Darius knew, wasn't measured in gold leaf and premium liquor. It was measured in how you treated people when you thought no one important was watching. He moved toward his seat with quiet confidence, aware of the eyes that tracked his movement. A flight attendant stood near the galley, her posture rigid, her gaze sharp as she sized him up in a single sweep. Darius settled into 3A, stowing his bag with care. Through the window, he could see ground crews moving with practiced efficiency, preparing the aircraft for departure. He had no idea that in less than an hour, this routine flight would become the most viral moment in aviation history. Or that the woman currently watching him with barely concealed suspicion would be the catalyst for everything that followed. Olivia Bennett leaned toward Chloe Simmons at the galley station, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that barely masked her disdain. "Did you see him board?" Chloe, younger and more eager to please her senior colleague, glanced toward row 3. "The guy in the blue suit?" "Navy blazer," Olivia corrected, as if the distinction mattered. "Look at that luggage. That's a Brunello Cucinelli garment bag. Do you know what those cost?" Chloe's eyes widened. "Thousands. Try 5,000. And that briefcase? Hermes. Easily 15 grand. Olivia's lips pursed into a thin line, her arms crossing over her chest. Something's not adding up. The assumption hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. In Olivia's world, certain people belonged in first class, and certain people didn't. And when the two categories seemed to contradict each other, her mind always settled on the same explanation. "You think he's," Chloe started. "I think people will do anything to look like they belong somewhere they don't," Olivia interrupted, her tone sharp with certainty. "Designer knockoffs are everywhere now. Or maybe he's borrowed someone else's ticket. Happens more than you'd think." Chloe bit her lip, doubt flickering across her features. "But his ticket scanned fine at the gate. I saw it on the manifest, 3A, paid in full." Olivia waved a dismissive hand. "Anyone can book a seat if they max out enough credit cards. It's the attitude that gives them away. Watch him. He's trying too hard to look comfortable." From their vantage point, Darius appeared perfectly at ease, his attention focused on the tablet he'd pulled from his briefcase. He scrolled through what looked like financial reports, occasionally making notes with a stylus, completely unaware of the narrative being constructed about him 15 feet away. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Olivia continued, her voice taking on the authority of experience. "You develop an instinct for who really belongs here and who's just pretending. See how he keeps adjusting his collar? That's nervousness. He's probably never worn a suit that expensive before." What Olivia interpreted as nervousness was actually Darius loosening his tie slightly for comfort, the unconscious gesture of a man who wore suits worth 10 times what she imagined and thought nothing of it. "What are we supposed to do?" Chloe asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Olivia's expression hardened with purpose. "We watch him closely. Very closely. If he's trying to sneak into first class, or if something else is going on, he'll slip up eventually. They always do. She turned back toward the cabin, her gaze fixed on Darius with an intensity that bordered on surveillance, already convinced she'd uncovered a fraud that needed exposing. 20 minutes into the flight, Darius pressed the call button above his seat. The soft chime echoed through the cabin, barely audible over the ambient engine hum. He waited. 3 rows back, he could hear Olivia's voice, bright and accommodating as she chatted with the Harrison couple. "Of course, Mrs. Harrison. I'll bring you a selection of teas right away. And for you, Mr. Harrison? Another scotch? Wonderful." The call light remained illuminated above Darius's seat. He waited another minute, then glanced up as Olivia finally approached, though approached was generous. She passed his row entirely, her attention fixed on the galley as if his lit call button were invisible. "Excuse me," Darius said, his voice calm and clear. Olivia paused, turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes. When you have a moment, could I trouble you for some water? Still, not sparkling." "We're quite busy with the beverage service right now," Olivia replied, her tone clipped. "I'll get to everyone shortly." Darius noted the phrasing. Everyone. As if he were part of an undifferentiated mass rather than a passenger who'd specifically requested service. "Of course," he said evenly. "No rush." Olivia moved on without acknowledgement, returning to the galley where Chloe was preparing a tray. "The Harrisons need their tea selection, and 7B wants champagne," Olivia announced, her movements precise and practiced. "What about 3A? Chloe asked, nodding toward Darius. "His light's been on for a while." "He can wait," Olivia said flatly. "I want to make sure our regular passengers are taken care of first. People who actually appreciate the service." Darius watched as Olivia made 3 more trips up and down the aisle, delivering drinks, offering warm towels, asking passengers if they needed anything else. She smiled warmly at each person she served, her professionalism impeccable. For everyone except him. When she finally reached his row again, 20 minutes after his initial request, Darius looked up from his tablet. "Still available for that water?" Olivia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Still or sparkling?" "Still, please. Room temperature if possible." She returned 5 minutes later with a small plastic cup filled halfway, setting it down on his tray table with barely concealed reluctance. "No napkin. No ice option. No offer of anything else." "Thank you," Darius said, his voice genuinely courteous. Olivia didn't respond, already turning away. Behind him, Darius heard Mrs. Harrison's delighted voice. "Oh, Olivia, dear, you've remembered my favorite Earl Grey. You're such a treasure." "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Harrison. Anything for our valued guests." Darius took a sip of his water, his expression unchanged. But in his mind, he was taking careful notes. This wasn't just poor service, it was a pattern. A systematic difference in treatment based solely on appearance and assumption. His company had just acquired this airline. And he was already seeing exactly what needed to change. Chloe Simmons felt the tension before she understood its source. It was in the set of Olivia's shoulders, the sharpness of her movements as she prepared the meal service, the way her eyes kept darting toward row 3 with increasing frequency. "He's been on his phone for 15 minutes, Olivia muttered, pulling Chloe aside near the rear galley. "Keeps looking around like he's casing the cabin." Chloe glanced toward Darius, who appeared to be doing nothing more threatening than scrolling through emails, his expression calm and focused. "I don't see." "You're not looking close enough," Olivia interrupted. "Watch his body language. He's tense. Calculating. I've seen this before, people who don't belong somewhere always give off this energy. Like they're waiting for someone to call them out. What Olivia perceived as tension was actually Darius reviewing quarterly reports from his CFO, his mind processing the financial implications of the morning's acquisition. His occasional glances around the cabin weren't surveillance, they were the habitual awareness of a man accustomed to reading rooms, understanding dynamics, seeing opportunities and problems before others noticed them. "I think you're reading too much into," Chloe began. "He requested water 20 minutes ago and barely touched it," Olivia continued, her voice taking on the fervor of someone building a case. "Who does that? And now he's making phone calls. During critical phases of flight. We're at cruising altitude," Chloe pointed out. "Phone calls are allowed." Olivia's expression hardened. "It's not about the rules, Chloe. It's about the pattern. Everything about him is off. The expensive clothes that don't quite fit right. They look perfectly tailored to me. The way he's too calm, too composed. Like he's performing. And now he's on his phone, probably texting someone, coordinating something. I'm telling you, something is wrong here." Chloe felt a knot forming in her stomach. She'd seen Olivia in this mode before, convinced, absolute, unwilling to consider alternative explanations. It usually ended with a passenger complaint filed and Olivia defending her instincts to management. "What do you want to do?" Chloe asked reluctantly. Olivia pulled out her phone, her fingers already moving across the screen. "I'm calling this in. If he's planning something, if this is some kind of setup, I'm not waiting until it's too late." "Calling what in?" "He hasn't done anything wrong. His presence is disruptive. Look around, other passengers are noticing him. They're uncomfortable." Olivia gestured vaguely at the cabin, where most passengers appeared completely absorbed in their own activities, utterly unaware of the drama unfolding in the galley. "Olivia, I really don't think. Airport security needs to be notified," Olivia said with finality, her thumb hovering over the dial button. "Better to be safe than sorry. If I'm wrong, fine. But if I'm right and something happens, it's on us." Chloe watched helplessly as Olivia made the call, her voice dropping to a professional whisper as she spoke to airport police. "If you're as shocked as we are by what's unfolding on this aircraft, hit that like button right now. And if you believe that respect should never depend on the color of someone's skin or how they're dressed, drop a comment telling us what you would have done if you'd witnessed this scene. Your voice matters, let's make sure stories like this are heard. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next few chapters will reveal a twist that no one saw coming." Officer Marcus Steele entered the aircraft first, his partner Natalie Brooks close behind. Both wore the crisp uniforms of airport police, their badges catching the cabin light, their presence immediately commanding attention. Passengers looked up from their devices, conversations dying mid-sentence as the officers moved purposefully down the aisle. Darius saw them coming, his expression unchanged as he looked up from his tablet. He knew instinctively they were there for him, the only question was why. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of your seat," Steele said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to compliance. He positioned himself in the aisle, blocking any potential exit, while Brooks stood slightly behind him, her hand resting casually near her radio. "Is there a problem, officers?" Darius asked calmly, making no move to stand. "We've received a report of a disruptive passenger," Steele continued. "We need you to come with us." Behind the officers, Olivia stood with her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of vindication and barely concealed satisfaction. Chloe lingered near the galley, her face pale, clearly uncomfortable with how quickly things had escalated. "I haven't been disruptive," Darius said evenly, his voice clear enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I've been sitting in my assigned seat, working quietly. I haven't raised my voice, haven't bothered anyone, haven't violated any regulations. Sir, we're not going to debate this, Brooks interjected. You need to gather your belongings and exit the aircraft. Now. Around them, passengers had begun recording on their phones. A business executive in 5C held his iPhone at chest level, the red recording light visible. A woman across the aisle did the same, her expression shocked. The viral moment was already beginning, though no one yet understood its full implications. You're making a mistake you won't be able to undo, Darius said quietly, meeting Steele's eyes with unwavering calm. I strongly suggest you verify with your superiors before proceeding. Is that a threat? Steele asked, his tone hardening. It's a warning, Darius replied. And it's the last one you'll get. Olivia stepped forward, her voice rising. Officers, please remove this man from my aircraft. He's been behaving suspiciously since boarding, making other passengers uncomfortable, refusing to cooperate with crew instructions. That's not true, an elderly voice interrupted. Mr. Harrison stood in the aisle behind the officers, his expression stern. I've been watching this entire situation unfold, and this gentleman has done nothing wrong. He's been the model of courtesy while your attendant has been treating him abominably. Mr. Harrison, please return to your seat, Olivia said sharply. I will not. This is disgraceful. Steele's hand moved to Darius's shoulder. Sir, stand up. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The metallic click of handcuffs opening echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. Phone cameras captured every moment, the calm man in the navy blazer, the aggressive officers, the pointing flight attendant, the uncomfortable passengers. And Darius, looking directly into one of the cameras with an expression of profound, patient understanding, as if he'd seen this moment coming long before anyone else. 1 minute, Darius said as Steele pulled him to his feet. I'm entitled to one phone call before you remove me from this aircraft. I know my rights. Brooks exchanged a glance with her partner. Technically, he wasn't under arrest, just being escorted off a plane. But something in Darius's tone, the absolute certainty in his voice, made her hesitate. Make it quick, Steele said reluctantly, loosening his grip slightly. Darius pulled his phone from his jacket pocket with measured precision, his fingers moving across the screen. The entire cabin watched in tense silence as he held the device to his ear, his expression utterly composed despite the handcuffs glinting at his wrists. Patricia, he said quietly when the line connected. It's Darius. I need you to convene an emergency board meeting. Immediately. Olivia rolled her eyes dramatically. He's probably calling his lawyer, she muttered to Chloe. Pull the acquisition files for Sky Alliance Regional, Darius continued, his voice steady and clear. Alert the PR team. And Patricia? Activate the crisis protocol. We have a situation that requires immediate executive attention. Brooks frowned. Something about his tone, the casual authority, the specific terminology, set off alarm bells in her mind. I'll video conference in from the ground, Darius said. Have legal standing by. And get me the complete personnel files for Flight 2847's crew. He paused, listening. Yes, the entire crew. Within the hour. He ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket. When he looked up at Steele, his expression was almost sympathetic. Officer, I strongly recommend you contact your commanding officer before we proceed further. The next 5 minutes will determine whether you have a career at the end of this day. Is that another threat? Steele demanded. It's information, Darius replied. What you do with it is your choice. In the galley, Olivia's phone buzzed. Then Chloe's. Then the captain's emergency line in the cockpit began ringing with insistent urgency. Somewhere in a boardroom 3 time zones away, Patricia Chen, executive assistant to the CEO of King Aviation Holdings, was setting in motion a chain of events that would ripple through the entire aviation industry. On the New York Stock Exchange trading floor, algorithms detected unusual activity in Sky Alliance regional stock. Volume was spiking. Something was happening. In the cockpit, Captain James Morrison answered his phone, listened for 30 seconds, and felt the blood drain from his face. "Say that again," he whispered, his hand gripping the receiver so tightly his knuckles turned white. Behind him, the general manager of the airport was already running down the jet bridge, his face flushed with exertion and panic, a tablet clutched in his hand showing a press release that had gone live 10 minutes early due to the emergency protocol activation. The press release with a photo of Darius King, CEO and primary shareholder of King Aviation Holdings, announcing the acquisition of Sky Alliance Regional effective midnight. The same Darius King currently standing in handcuffs in row 3. 5 minutes had passed since his phone call. And everything was about to change. The cockpit door burst open with enough force to make several passengers gasp. Captain Morrison emerged, his face ashen, his uniform suddenly appearing too tight around his collar. Behind him, the general manager of the airport, David Chen, a man known for his unflappable composure, practically stumbled into the cabin, his tablet clutched in one trembling hand. Both men froze when they saw the scene before them, Officers Steele and Brooks with their hands on Darius King, handcuffs glinting on his wrists, phone cameras recording from a dozen angles. "Release him," Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible. Then, louder, with desperate urgency, "Release him now." Steele's grip on Darius's arm tightened reflexively. "Captain, we were called here by your crew to remove a disruptive." "That's not a disruptive passenger," Chen interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. He held up his tablet, the screen displaying the press release with Darius's official photograph beside the King Aviation Holdings logo. "That's Darius King, the owner of this airline. As of midnight last night, he owns every aircraft, every gate, every employee of Sky Alliance Regional." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the engine hum seemed to fade as the weight of Chen's words settled over the cabin like a physical presence. Brooks's hand fell away from Darius's shoulder as if she'd been burned. Steele's face went from confident authority to sick realization in the span of a heartbeat. Morrison moved forward, his hands raised in a gesture of appeasement and apology. "Mr. King, I cannot begin to express," his voice broke. "We had no idea you were on board. No one informed us of your inspection." "That was intentional," Darius said quietly, his eyes moving from the captain to the officers to Olivia, who had gone completely still near the galley, her face the color of old paper. "I wanted to see the standard of service as experienced by a regular passenger. I wanted to see how my employees treat people when they think no one important is watching." Chen approached slowly, as one might approach a wild animal or an unexploded bomb. "Sir, this is my fault. As general manager, the responsibility for your treatment falls entirely on my shoulders. I will tender my resignation immediately." "No," Darius interrupted, raising one cuffed hand slightly. "Your resignation isn't required, Mr. Chen. You weren't on this aircraft. You didn't make assumptions based on appearance. You didn't call security on a paying passenger who had done nothing wrong." His gaze settled on Olivia, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his attention. "Officer Steele, you can remove these handcuffs now." Steele's hands shook as he fumbled with the key, the metallic click of the cuffs opening somehow louder than when they'd closed. The restraints fell away, leaving red marks on Darius's wrists that would be visible in every photo and video already spreading across social media. Morrison's voice was hollow. "Sir, if you'll allow me to explain the crew's actions." "No explanation is necessary, Captain," Darius said, rubbing his wrists absently. "The crew's actions have been perfectly clear. What happens next is also perfectly clear. Around them, passengers remained frozen, phones still recording, witnesses to a reckoning that was only beginning. Natalie Brooks found her voice first, stepping back from Darius with her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Mr. King, we were responding to a crew member's report of a potential security threat. We followed protocol based on the information we were given." Darius turned to face her fully, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "Officer Brooks, you were lied to. Used as a weapon in someone else's prejudice. That's not your fault, that's theirs." His gaze shifted to Olivia and Chloe. "But I recommend you file a complete report about being misled, for your own protection." Brooks nodded quickly, relief flickering across her features. Steele looked like he might be sick, the full implications of what they'd nearly done settling over him like a shroud. David Chen stepped forward, his tablet still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. "Mr. King, I need to address the crew situation immediately. This kind of treatment of passengers is completely unacceptable and represents a fundamental failure of." "Agreed," Darius said simply. He turned toward the galley where Olivia and Chloe stood frozen. "Ms. Bennett, Ms. Simmons, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'd appreciate honest answers." Olivia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Chloe looked ready to burst into tears. "When I boarded this aircraft, what was your first impression of me?" The silence stretched. Finally, Olivia found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. I thought your luggage looked expensive." "Too expensive." "Too expensive for what?" Darius pressed gently. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Harrison stood in the aisle, his expression a mixture of vindication and sadness. Mrs. Harrison clutched her husband's arm, her face reflecting the horror of understanding. "For someone who looked like you," Olivia finally admitted, her voice breaking on the last word. Tears began streaming down her face, whether from shame, fear, or the sudden realization of what she'd done, it was impossible to tell. Darius nodded slowly. "And instead of asking questions, instead of trusting that a passenger in first class belonged there, you created a narrative based on assumptions. Then you escalated that narrative until armed officers were called to remove a man who had done absolutely nothing wrong." "I'm sorry," Olivia whispered, the words inadequate and far too late. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," Darius interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. "And that's precisely the problem." Chen cleared his throat, his professional demeanor returning as he moved into damage control mode. "Effective immediately, Ms. Bennett and Ms. Simmons, you are terminated from employment with Sky Alliance Regional. You will be escorted from this aircraft and required to surrender all company property. Security will retrieve your personal belongings from your lockers and forward them to your addresses on file." Chloe let out a sob, her hands covering her face. Olivia simply stared at the floor, her entire body trembling. "You'll also be placed on the industry-wide no-hire list," Chen continued, his voice harder than before. "Your actions today have demonstrated a fundamental incompatibility with service industry standards." Darius held up a hand. "Mr. Chen, the termination stands. But I'll handle the rest." He turned back to Olivia and Chloe, his expression unreadable. "I hope you understand that this isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about accountability and consequences for your actions." Darius remained standing in the aisle as Olivia and Chloe were escorted off the aircraft by Chen's assistant, their faces streaked with tears, their careers in aviation over before lunch. The remaining passengers watched in stunned silence, their phones still recording what had become the most viral moment in recent airline history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Darius began, his voice carrying naturally through the cabin without needing to be raised. "My name is Darius King. As of midnight last night, my company acquired Sky Alliance Regional, making me the owner of this airline and 46 others like it." He paused, letting the information settle. Mr. Harrison was nodding approvingly. A businesswoman in 4B had tears in her eyes. The executive who'd been recording looked like he was witnessing history. "I boarded this flight anonymously because I wanted to see the truth of our service, not the polished version presented to VIPs, but the actual experience our passengers receive. What I experienced today was unacceptable. Not just the poor service, but the fundamental assumption that I didn't belong in the seat I had paid for, based solely on my appearance." His gaze swept the cabin, making eye contact with multiple passengers. This kind of treatment happens every day in luxury spaces, airports, hotels, restaurants, retail stores. People make snap judgments based on race, age, gender, appearance, and those judgments create invisible hierarchies where some customers are valued and others are tolerated at best. Morrison stood near the cockpit door, his expression a mixture of shame and resolve. Brooks and Steele remained in the back, listening intently. "Effective immediately, I'm announcing a new global policy for all King Aviation Holdings properties," Darius continued. "It's called the Universal Dignity Protocol. Every employee, from flight attendants to gate agents to executives, will undergo comprehensive bias training. Every passenger complaint about discriminatory treatment will be investigated by an independent third party. And every instance of verified bias will result in immediate termination and industry-wide reporting." He pulled his phone from his pocket again, pulling up a document he'd dictated during his 5-minute phone call. "But more than that, I'm establishing a passenger bill of rights. Respect is not a privilege to be earned through appearance or status. Respect is a fundamental right of every person who steps aboard our aircraft. You don't need to dress a certain way, speak a certain way, or look a certain way to deserve basic human dignity." A passenger in the back began clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire cabin erupted in applause. Darius raised his hand for quiet, a slight smile touching his lips for the first time since boarding. "This moment is being recorded and shared around the world right now. By tonight, millions of people will see what happened here. Some will say I overreacted, that everyone deserves a second chance, that Olivia and Chloe made an honest mistake." His expression grew serious again. "But this wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. A choice to see a black man in first class and assume he didn't belong. A choice to treat him as suspicious rather than as a valued customer. A choice to escalate to law enforcement rather than simply asking a question or checking a manifest." He looked directly at one of the cameras still recording. "To anyone watching this who has experienced similar treatment, in an airport, a store, a restaurant, anywhere, I want you to know that you weren't imagining it. Your experience was real. And it's time we acknowledged that luxury should never come with a demographic requirement." Morrison stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Mr. King, on behalf of the entire crew and staff of this airline, I want to formally apologize. And I want to personally commit to implementing every aspect of your Universal Dignity Protocol. You have my word." Darius nodded, accepting the apology. "Captain Morrison, I appreciate that. Now, I believe we have a flight to complete. I'd like to reach my destination, if possible." As Morrison returned to the cockpit and the remaining crew began preparing for the delayed departure, Darius settled back into seat 3A. His tablet lit up with messages, his PR team coordinating the response, his legal team preparing statements, his board members requesting immediate briefings. But for the moment, he simply sat in the quiet dignity of knowing that sometimes, the worst experiences create the best opportunities for change. And that respect, given freely to all, costs nothing but means everything. This story is based on the harsh reality that countless people face every single day, being judged, dismissed, and disrespected simply because of how they look. If Darius King's story moved you, If it made you think differently about the invisible biases that exist in our world, then do 3 things right now. First, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that challenge injustice and celebrate dignity. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, whether they've experienced discrimination themselves or need to understand what others go through. Third, drop a comment below telling us, have you ever witnessed or experienced treatment like this? What did you do? What should we all do when we see prejudice in action? Remember, respect isn't a luxury item reserved for those who look a certain way or carry a certain status. Respect is a fundamental human right. And every time we stand up against bias, every time we speak out against injustice, every time we treat others with dignity regardless of their appearance, we make the world a little more like the one Darius King is trying to build. Until next time, treat everyone like they own the plane, because you never know, they just might. Stay blessed, stay kind, and we'll see you in the next story. Make sure you are subscribed.